All right, all right. Well, it is straight up 11 o'clock, so I guess we should get started. Kat, do you want to start off?
Sure. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending another one of the Down Syndrome Association of Houston virtual workshops. In collaboration, we have Michelle and Karen here today to talk to you about IEPs and 504s. These are 504. I just learned that term. I've always known IEP, but I just learned that other part of the term. But we know we had a lot of questions about this, and it's the perfect time to have a workshop. So thank you, ladies, for joining us and helping us put this on.
Well, thank you so much for having us today. We are super excited to be here. I'm Michelle Morris with Consolidated Planning Group. We're thrilled to be part of this community, and Karen is one of my favorite advocates in the special needs community. So Karen, thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we have just a couple of things to talk about before we get started. Couple of housekeeping items. I can, there we go, slideshow. We cannot see you or hear you. If you have any questions today, feel free to put those in the chat, and I'll be letting Karen know when we have questions. We are recording this session, and we will send it out to you afterwards. Consolidated Planning Group is a special needs planning and financial planning firm. We can help with protection plans, lifetime care, transition planning, ABLE accounts, and advocacy, really. I mean, we're very proud to serve in this community. A few things that should be on your special needs planning radar: how to develop a special needs care plan, future care cost estimates, Texas waivers and interest lists, making sure you're on those lists. Sometimes they can be very long. SSI and SSDI, when your children turn 18, they will probably be able to qualify for that. ABLE accounts, beneficiary designations, making sure that you don't have a special needs child listed as a beneficiary on any account. How to fund a special needs trust. If you get child support beyond the child's age 18, it needs to be directed to a special needs trust, or else they're going to lose their benefits, their SSI benefits. You should start touring residential living facilities around age 15. Sometimes there are waiting lists, and you want to make sure that you get on the waiting list for that, and that you have a good idea of which facilities you like and where you want to go, if that's in your future. Guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, supported decision-making, partial guardianship. And you should start considering what route you want to take about 6 months before your child turns 18. There are plenty of post-high school options, certificate programs, and colleges that have special programs, things like that. And getting on the waiting list for any community-based care facilities is really, really helpful. Karen, are my slides going? Do you see your slide? Perfect. Again, thank you so much. I love working with Karen. I love her on TikTok. She cracks me up. Her advice is truly outstanding. So thank you again for being here with us today. And thank you, Karen, for all of this great information.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you to the Down Syndrome Association of Houston. It's an honor to be here, and whatever information I can provide you or resource you, we are happy to do. So I am, if we haven't met, I am the special education boss. I've helped families navigate and negotiate 504 IEP outcomes for anyone that sits at the IEP 504 table. And my heart really is one thing, and that is that we have successful student outcomes. Unfortunately, like all children don't come with a manual. My husband said if our kids came with a manual, I must have left mine at the hospital. But walking through, with a child with a disability, it is something that you need as much as possible a roadmap for. And so we're going to try to give you a little bit of that as it relates to education. So as a special education advocate, I serve families that have an individual with a disability between the ages of 3 and 22 in schools that take federal funds. So 3 to 22 in schools that take federal funds. And so the goal is successful student outcomes, as we see on the next slide. And what that means is whatever their need is, whether their need is functional, academic, behavioral, emotional, language, communicative, or social. And so we do that by partnering with the educational system. I know a lot of you will have an opportunity to take your kiddos to private schools when they're younger, but my position really is there's not a better setting than public school when we get it right. We don't always get it right, but when we get it right, it gives you the most depth and breadth of options available for your kiddos. And so, the first slide here is, when did you know something was different? And I think that encompasses a lot of factors, right? Are we first-time parents? Is this a first-time child? Do we have another child to compare it to? And I know, having a child can be a little competitive. I remember I told somebody that my child rolled over at 9 days, like that was some sort of award, right? But we compare our kiddos as soon as we get them, and that's probably not a good thing, but it's what we do. We got to lean in and listen to that a little bit. What was different? What's something a little bit off? Obviously, the older they get, you can see those milestones. Obviously, your pediatrician is going to tell you where you are based on a lot of what you report to them. But really, what is something that you noticed it was different? I think first thing that we have to think about is communication, right? How we connect with the entire world is through communication and language. And so we look at language. Is there a language impairment? Is there something that we can use to augment that? And what is the deficit? Next, we're going to look at when something's different academically, right? Are kiddos doing the same thing that their same age peers are doing academically, functionally, whether it's those, personal needs, can they zip up their jackets, button their jackets, those sorts of things. Emotional, right? Do our kiddos have the same emotional response to the regular stimuli that other kiddos have? And then, of course, behavioral, right? And so those are the things that we need to look at when we think that there's a difference, a gap, something's not calibrated. So now we respond to the need. And so there's nothing better than early intervention. And, as a mom, at first time mom, my oldest son had a disability, and, I was of the same mentality. We'll keep an eye on him. He'll grow out of it. Your cousin had that. And while those all sound good, and that might actually happen, I would rather err on the side of being proactive and getting ahead of that. And so the great thing about living in America is we have special education that is actually the only place in the world that's funded federally and by state. And so in Texas or wherever you're watching, if your child has a speech impairment, they're probably likely to be able to benefit from special education services. So when you get about 2.5 years old for your kiddo, I would recommend that you call the school district, whatever school district you live in, or whatever school district your child's in a private school at. So if your child's in a private school, let's say in Houston Independent School District, but you live in Alvin, the testing would be done there. So we want our kiddos, if they meet criteria and eligibility, to be able to begin to start services the day they turn 3 years old, right? And so you would reach out to your district. I would just reach out to the campus closest to you, since it's before the age of kindergarten. And this is how we're going to get our child tested in the next slide. So you want to get your child tested. And I, as a mom, I know that there's two things, right? There's fear, and then there's fear of the unknown, right? So testing does one of two things, and I really want you to write this down. Testing does one of two things. It identifies or eliminates. And I want both, right? Not knowing doesn't serve anybody. And so when you're looking at testing, I always recommend to all of my families, no matter what the suspected disability is, right? You get special ed testing because there's a suspected disability, that I always am going to ask for a full individualized evaluation. I am not going to ask for a 504 evaluation. I'm going to ask for a full evaluation in special education. And why is it? Well, let me tell you what that is, because they're two very different things. A 504 is a civil right, and it simply is a document that confirms you're not being discriminated based on your disability and allows the individual to have accommodations. And I've many trainings on our Special Education Academy YouTube channel. You can avail yourself of that as it relates to the differences between a 504 and IEP. And that's what rests in the 504. Probably in 25 years, I can count on less than one hand kiddos that needed a 504. The IEP, the Individualized Education Program, is that. It is a program that, based on the disability or disabilities, drives supports, services, goals, and intervention time. That does not happen on a 504. It doesn't. And so if you want education, if you want goals, if you want specially designed instruction delivered to your child, and we track those deficits and try to mitigate the impact of their disability, then the IEP is where you want to go. So getting your child tested to identify a disability. So when we go in, look at the next slide, we're going to ask for a full individualized evaluation. And so often when our kids are little, the school offers us an arena evaluation. And while there's nothing wrong with that, it may not have the correct specificity to identify your child's unique needs. Certainly, if your child has a sensory disability, if they're deaf or hard of hearing, visually impaired, deaf, blind, I would ask for a more robust individualized evaluation. But as my great friend, Dr. Michael Webb says, the F in full individualized evaluation still stands for full. So make sure that they are doing those evaluations in all areas. And those areas are, and not limited to, language, to include pragmatic. Make sure when you're asking for a language evaluation that you're asking for pragmatic. Usually, if there's not a suspicion of autism, they will not do that pragmatic piece. And pragmatic is simply that social appropriateness, right? I walk in and Michelle's crying, and I say, "Why are you crying, Michelle? I lost my cat this weekend." And then I show you my Legos, right? So that's such an important component of language, even if there's not a suspicion of autism. You're going to have medical, you're going to have sociological, right? That impact that happened in a kid's life that is outside of school. Maybe grandma moved in, maybe there was a loss of someone, maybe you went through Harvey, sort of, maybe dad was deployed, sort of these outside factors that drive outcomes. Next, we're going to be looking at intellect, cognition. And so, when you have a child that has a profound speech impairment, an IQ test, a cognitive test, is based on language response, right? So there's hundreds of IQ tests that you could take. For my kiddos that are greatly impacted by a language difference, I always recommend the lighter 3 or the unit. And those are specific names of evaluations that are 100% nonverbal. They're going to give me a different outcome than a verbal cognitive evaluation. And you can reach out to us later if you want more specifics on that sort of thing. I want to set my kiddos up for the most success that they can get. And I want the evaluators to get the exact numbers that are correct, right? And including that cognitive, you're going to get an achievement. I always say cognitive, that's your cognitive processes, right? Achievement is what I can get out, right? I always say your cognition's like your file cabinet, and then achievement is what I can get out of my file cabinet. I'm not really smart because I have hundreds of files. I'm smart because I put the label on them. And sometimes there's a difference when we're processing information and how we are able to then retrieve it and or store it. So that's really important. Next, we're going to look at adaptive behavior. And that simply is how much is my student like or differences with same age peers, whether that's leisure, community, language, all sorts of pieces. Then you're also going to ask for a full psychological evaluation. And sometimes that language can sound kind of scary, or you'll say, my student didn't get sent to the office. If that was the case, I would have had the full evaluation, right? I invented the office. So it's not about, are they a behavior problem, or did they have a psychological difference? It simply is, we all have behaviors, right? When I talk, I use my hands. If Michelle said I couldn't use my hands, this would be a short webinar, right? So what are those behaviors that I have? But more importantly, what are the behaviors that I have that impact my learning and or the other learning of others? And we simply want to identify things so that we can teach a child with a disability strategies to self-manage it. And that's the one, there is one goal in special ed. We teach the individual with a disability strategies to self-manage it. We're not trying to make it go away. We're not trying to close the gap. We're certainly trying to make sure the gap doesn't get bigger. And so that's what we're looking at. And again, also there's going to be related and instructional services, which might be anything from Braille, physical therapy, occupational therapy, music therapy, counseling as related service. There's a list of them. And so you want to make sure that you get those evaluations. Okay, so next we're going to look at the identifying the impact of your child's disability, right? So that is just basically the acuity of it, right? And that's not good news or bad news. Everything that relates to your child's disability, we want to know the specificity of it so we can correctly address it. So what is the impact of your child's disability? So after you get testing, one of three things are going to happen, right? And so we look at the next slide. The first outcome is that your child does not have a disability that needs additional support, right? So we did the testing. There might be some areas of deficits, which, great testing gives you great information. You want to make sure that you have somebody that can correctly and tell you the interpretation and outcome of those assessments. What do these numbers mean? Often people don't know what is fluid reasoning, what is auditory processing, what is processing speed. All of those pieces are important, whether your child has a disability or not, how you educate them going forward. So the outcome number one would be that your child does not have a disability that needs additional support. At the end of that evaluation would be called a D&Q, does not qualify. The second outcome would be that your child does have a disability that needs additional support at school. And so that might be that we've identified some deficits and that they would need support through a 504. So a 504 and an IEP both have the same origins, and that is that the student has an identified disability. The student has an identified disability. The 504 says the student has an identified disability and is in need of accommodations, maybe a behavioral plan. And based on your civil right to not be discriminated against based on disability, that we provide them accommodations that the other student wouldn't have. If it's something that the teacher gives to everybody, then that doesn't rise to the level of an accommodation. So an accommodation means something above what the general ed teacher is going to provide to the entire class, right? And so a 504 is there's no goals, there's no requirements on how often we meet, but it does give some kids additional support. Additionally, under a 504, you would have general ed dyslexia. So that might be an outcome that would benefit your student. So the bulk of what we're going to talk about today is outcome number 3. That your child does have a disability that needs additional support at school, calls an IEP, an Individualized Education Program. I want to say that special education is a service. It's not a location. Children don't have labels. Packages have labels. So it's just an eligibility that drives services. And so what would those services possibly be? Well, those services are going to be related to the multidisciplinary team, the many members that did the evaluation, and their recommendations to the IEP team, right? Or as we say in Texas, the ARD committee. And so you will have had a diagnostician, you will have had a speech therapist, you will have had maybe adaptive PE, you will have the music therapist, all the persons that did their evaluations. Your evaluation should be long. I had a young lady the other day from another state, and her evaluation was 6 pages long. We call that a problem. But your evaluation should be long so that we know in all of these areas what the need is. And so out of that, we will begin to develop an individualized education program. And so at the end of every section, whether it's the speech language pathologist, the reading specialist, the diagnostician, the licensed specialist in school psychology, all of those persons will have their evaluation, when they did it and what the outcomes were. It takes, the schools are allowed 45 school days to do the evaluation. So there are only 180 school days in a year. So 45 school days are 1/3 of the year. So you want to make sure that you don't do the thing that I fear for parents to do, and that is to wait. There is no benefit in waiting. If there is a need, you want to identify it and address it immediately. Waiting just makes the gap bigger, okay? When you're developing, the next page, we're developing a complete individualized education program. I think it's important. I probably should go back and put it in all capital letters, complete. When I get people's paperwork, and I do about 500 IEP meetings a year, plus mediation, due process, and federal filings with the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Civil Rights. Whether you're from Maine or San Diego, I tell people on the phone that your paperwork is a train wreck. I would like to say that I've been wrong about this, and I haven't been. And the reason is really many people put this paperwork together but it's incomplete. I should be able to pick up your child's IEP paperwork or Kat or Michelle, and we would both, all three, do the exact thing. And I think because we have become so familiar with each other and the team and the schools and the student, that we assumptively know what we intended. But the truth is, you should be able to pick up your paperwork and that everybody, every teacher, every substitute would deliver the exact same product to people. And so we need to make sure that our paperwork is complete. I want you to go back and look at your paperwork based on these next 5 pillars and say, is it complete, Karen, or is it lacking? So let's go to pillar number 1. So this is the most important one. If this is not right, the document is invalid and fraudulent. If this is not right, the document's invalid and fraudulent. So the present levels of academic achievement and functional performance, the PLAF. In other parts of the country, we call it the PLOP. So what that means is, what does a student look like across settings? And this may include from bus to bus. At minimum, it includes from bell to bell. So what does Billy look like during reading? What does Billy look like during science? And what I mean by what does he look like, how does his disability or his disabilities impact him in those settings? So when I look at reading present levels, it says Billy reads at level B. He is learning inferencing and enjoys reader's workshop. That doesn't give me any information. The information in the present levels should tell me the level of support that he needs, because everything good and right happens in the present levels. So a lot of times we just have these statements that are informational, but they don't tell me about the impact of the disability. They should tell me about the impact of the disability if he is nonverbal and has a communication device. They tell me about the impact of the disability if he has autism and needs a lot of sensory input during class. Those need to be identified across all content areas. If you have switch teachers, both teachers need to have input. If you have 4 teachers, if you have 7 teachers, and it goes on and on. Any of the teachers, any of the therapists or service providers that are providing a service, whether it's a dyslexia teacher, adaptive PE, music therapist, all of those persons would then also have information that goes into the present levels. So I always say that I like big plaffs and I cannot lie. That's a song, you'll have to do that later. Your plaff should be puffy. If your plaff is not puffy, then you don't have one. You do not have one. And I bet that most of your plaffs do not even say the student's disability inside of the present levels. So it should say Billy is a student that has a speech impairment, orthopedic impairment, and comma, has a condition of Down syndrome. Right, it should be complete. We should include all of their federal eligibilities, comma, and their diagnosed medical conditions. Why? Because that's the child in totality. And some of those medical conditions might rise to the level of being a federal eligibility. Okay, so that's pillar number 1, present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. I should be able to take the plaque and stand at the back of somebody's room and say, oh, that's Billy. If you can't, then you need to go back to the table and start over. Pillar number 2, annual goals. And so annual goals are often thought of in academics. And while that's part of them, I have a lot of kiddos that don't have any academic goals because they're quite the smarty pants. But they have great behavioral needs, functional needs, emotional needs. So the annual goals are extended school year, academic, functional, behavioral, language, social, emotional, and then any other related service provider, which again, that list is endless. You might have Braille, you might have orientation and mobility, any of those. So those are what annual goals are based around. Now, certainly you require an annual goal academically if there is an identified academic deficit, or if your child is in a program or a self-contained setting. So those require academic goals. And then of course, you're gonna have all the related service providers. What you don't need is 17 math goals. I know you guys like a lot of goals. We want the teachers to teach. We don't want them to walk around with a clipboard. So we look at in those areas, especially as it relates to academics, what is the greatest need? And sometimes when reading goals, I'll tell the team, let's just stop reading the goal. Miss Cindy, tell me what it's like when he's reading. Well, he rolls around on the carpet. Fantastic, right? That's information that maybe she didn't have in the goal. And so usually the schools have a goal bank, which is why if you ask 4 of your friends, their kids might have the exact same goal. So in the software, we'll say third grader math, and of course, the state standard comes up in the software. It's our job as a committee to go back and make it what? Individualized, right? And often annual goals, if you go and read them, they tell me what you want the student to do, but they don't tell me what the responsibility is of the school. And the responsibility of the school in the annual goal is to provide SDI, specially designed instruction. How you'll know that it's specially designed as instruction is it's special and it's instruction. Okay. All right. Number 3, we have needed accommodations. And notice the word needed accommodations. The reason they're needed accommodations is because I look at IEPs all day long and they're not needed. They're not needed. Check for understanding when necessary. If at teacher's discretion, or I hear this, well, I want them to have it just in case. No, we don't do just in case. And accommodation is a civil right. It's a civil right in the 504 and it's a civil right in the IEP. So you should have accommodations. I don't know that I've ever had a student that would need more than 9 or 10 accommodations. A lot of your accommodations, you've just sort of repeated the same thing. So if your child has 34 accommodations, here's the question. Can Mrs. Smith get up in the morning and deliver 34 accommodations before she's just to your child before she says good morning? Probably not. So an accommodation inside of an IEP is another layer of support that we've added. And we know that without adding that accommodation, that he's not going to be successful in his IEP goals. Again, it's something above what we do for the other kiddos. If everybody else gets a graphic organizer, we don't need to write it in there. If everybody gets a 4-function calculator, then we don't need it in there. So I want you to go back and prune your accommodations. I promise you, you have way too many. Okay. Number 4, where to implement the student's program. We call that LRE, right? The least restrictive environment. I like to call it the most supported environment. I don't like the word LRE, but nobody asked me. But if they did, I would tell them. So the least restrictive environment simply says, okay, we've developed this math goal. Where's the most appropriate place that Billy can make expected rate of progress, right? When we write a goal, we're looking at expected rate of progress. We have a beginning point and an end point. What setting are we going to get the most gains, right? So where to implement the student's program. It is not an all or nothing. You don't have to go to all life skills or all adaptive behavior or all autism unit or any specific setting. I have kiddos that have all kinds of needs that are in life skills, resource, and general ed. There's no requirement based on disability or age that you go into a certain setting. Please know that, right? And we want to give our kids rigor. I know that a lot of us want our kids to be safe and it's busy in the hall and that might overwhelm them, but we don't educate based on fear. We don't educate based on what if. We don't educate based on, I don't want him, him to be upset. We educate based on data. And data shows that when we provide the right support and give our kids the right expectations and give them a little bit of rigor, that they can soar, right? Because our kids are not going to be in school when they're 30. They're not going to be in school when they're 40. They're going to live a very long time. They're probably going to live 70 years after high school. So our goal in special ed is 3 things by federal law: gainful employment, independent living, and further education. So what does that look like for our kiddos? It looks different for every kiddo, right? So gainful employment might be supported employment. Any student can have supported employment. That can be fully supported, that can be volunteer work, that can be paid work. Independent living, what does that mean? That might be that he's finally making his bunk bed in his room, right? That might be in a group setting, that might be with a roommate. I don't know what that looks like, but that is the goal. And then further education. We're always looking for students to have a want and a desire to further their education. And we live, Houston is a resource-rich city. We have lots of services and supports. You're going to have to go out and get them. Nobody rings on your doorbell with a basket. Here's everything you need for your child for a lifetime. And so dig deep and find those resources because they're available to you so that your kid can be successful. Okay, and then pillar number 5, students required special education support time. So SOS, call it to save our student, but it's really the schedule of services, right? So the schedule of services is what sort of support, what sort of services in a scheduled day does he need to be successful? We have the reading block, which is 60 minutes long. How much additional support does he need? Well, if the reading block 60 minutes, we don't say he needs 60 minutes. No. 2 things happen in a class, right? Instruction and production. So while the teacher's teaching, I doubt that we need somebody on his hip. If you need somebody on his hip while somebody's teaching, that's a different conversation, right? I hear a lot of families, they want their child to have a para, a one-on-one para. And while I hear you, data doesn't support that that is the best outcome almost always. There's some very unique times where it is. But when I have a kiddo who's in need of a para just solely designated to them, it can create learned dependency, and they get over attached to that person. And it's hard to tease out the level of learning. So when I have a kiddo that needs one-on-one, it's usually for one of two things. It's either for a great medical need, full-time nursing, or they are a danger to themselves or a danger to others. And so we know that the higher the student ratio, the more gains that we can get, and we can see the amount of learning. So I just wanted to share that. So schedule of services, we're gonna look at how much time he needs in each content area. So reading 60 minutes based on usually, not that anything's very usual, usually 25% of that block is an appropriate amount of support time to begin with, right? Because about half that block, that teacher's gonna teach, and then we're expected to get to work. And so I would start out with 25% of that block based on that acuity. And then we look at all of those settings, right? We look at academic settings, we look at recess, we look at library, we look at music, we look at the hall, we look at lunch, my favorite class, right? Does that student need support? And included all the way to, does my student meet eligibility and need to access special education transportation? And anybody that knows me, I put them on the special ed bus when they're 1 month old. No, not 1 month old. But I am a big fan of the bus because that's more real life for kiddos if it's right for you, because dad gets in his car and goes to work, mom gets in his car and goes to work. And so special education transportation is it's a driveway to drive to school. And so often it gives kids a better way of transitioning and not having so much emotionality when they get to school. And so that's an option for you. You don't have to take it, but that's certainly an option. Next slide says partnering with the school for appropriate implementation of FAPE. So we're partnering with the school. The parents of the student with a disability under federal case law are identified as experts. They're identified as experts as it relates to the IEP team. IEP team has 5 stakeholders. Number 1 is the parent and or guardian. Number 2 is the LEA representative. That's a fancy acronym for local education agency, your school. That's usually a principal or maybe a counselor to get that certification. Next, you're going to have an evaluator that has able to understand, explain and interpret evaluation results. And then also you're going to have a general education teacher and a special education teacher. Those 5 members of the committee must be in a room together for you to have an IEP team. A lot of times we have people signing in and signing out, then you don't have an IEP team convened. So make sure that you at minimum have those 5 members. So when I say partner with the school for appropriate implementation for FAPE, the acronym FAPE is free, appropriate public education. And what does free, appropriate public education mean? Well, it means what have hearing officers and appellate judges in these 3 states called the Fifth Circuit agreed is free, appropriate public education. And so that is delivering that plan that we developed together. The school needs you to partner with them, and you need to partner with the school so that we are all speaking the same language for our kiddo, right? What happens at home, what happens at school, those are intertwined. They're not exempt of each other. And so I always tell parents when you start school, I call it the Zach Pack, is that I get a 4x6 picture of my kiddo, stapled on a piece of paper, and then I just write, he's amazing, this is what he's working on, it's better if you call me than dad, and just give them a little synopsis of who your child is. Teachers get 1 million kids every year, right? And while I would like to think that every teacher in the world sits down and reads every kiddo's paperwork every week, that's probably not happening, right? So give them that entree, that way they know your kiddo, and it gives them sort of a little heads up. During the school year, you'll be getting IEP progress reports. And IEP is not a grade, but it's a goal that we've written to identify the area of deficit and work on mitigating it, right? And so when you get their grades, every grading period, with it, if it's every 9 weeks or every 6 weeks, you'll get an IEP progress, and that will have comments, that will have, is the student making progress? Does the student need something extra to make progress? You want to make sure that you get those, that's your responsibility, and line those up with expectation. If we wrote a goal that in 36 instructional weeks for 1 year, the student's going to be at 80%. And then the first grading period, which is 1/4 of the year, he's at 10%. We probably have the wrong goal, the wrong criteria, the wrong instruction. And so we want to go back to the table and adjust that goal. Likewise, if we get the goal after one grading period and he's at 60%, well, then he's going to master that goal. Anytime you adjust goals in the individualized education program, you can do that by what we call paper amendment. You don't actually have to come back to the table. You do have to actually come to the table for two things when you are looking at consideration for change of eligibility or consideration for change of time. So know that. All right, and then the next one is time to reassess your child. I think a lot of us who have the ability to know what your child's disability is at birth or in the first or second years of their life, that it's identified early. Sometimes we kind of miss this a little bit. We know that they have this disability. We know that they have this disability. And during reassessments, we do what we call pull that eligibility forward. So federally and state, the school is required to look at new evaluations every 3 years, a triennial. We do new evaluations to get new information, right? You wouldn't go to a pediatrician and never tell them new information. So the kind of assessments that I give a 3-year-old, very different than the kind of assessments I can give a 6-year-old. So we're asking for new evaluations in specific areas. At reassessments, you don't have to do all areas. If you have a child that was 3, if your child is 3 and they have an NCEC eligibility, non-categorical early childhood suspicion of intellectual disability, then it's required by 6 that you do a cognitive evaluation to see if that eligibility is appropriate. So those are some unique eligibilities that we have in Texas: NCEC-ED, NCEC-AU, and NCEC-ID. And then at 6, you have to reevaluate for those. You don't have to reevaluate if you and the committee agree that that's not appropriate. Assessments or reassessments are always consensual. It's the parent's right to provide consent or to revoke consent. So let's say that you're doing assessments or you're doing reassessments and you decide halfway through, I don't want to do this, and you revoke your written consent for assessments, then it stops. However, what has already been done or assessments that have been delivered are not retroactive, so that will become part of your child's file. I know that I've had clients that have said, I disagree with this evaluation. I don't want it in my child's file. If it's completed, it's in their file. If at the end of assessments, you don't agree with the outcome, you have a legal right to request an IEE, an independent education evaluation at the expense of the school district. And I always say it's somebody who's Switzerland that has the eligibilities and qualifications to do that evaluation using different instruments to see if there's possibly a different outcome. And so that's kind of a lot of information, but that's sort of the short version of IEP 504. At the end of the day, your partners, we're not adversaries. I always hate that there's two sides of the table, because really there's just one side of the table, the side of the child. And the quicker that we can get in there and partner with schools, and listen, God bless teachers. Anybody that takes somebody else's kid all day, I think they're amazing. But we all sit at a different place, right? Where you sit affects what you see affects what you feel, and what you feel affects what you do. So we all do have different advantages and different places that we see, but as quickly as you can get in there and partner with the school so that your kid can have successful student outcomes, the better. And my mission statement really is, when we get it right for the child, we get it right for everybody. And when we can identify what we're not doing right and make those adjustments, we're all going to be successful. So, please know that if there's any way that we can serve you, if there's anything that we can provide you resources, we are happy to do that. You just email us at admin@specialeducationacademy.com, and we are happy to do that. We train everyone that sits at the 504 IEP table. We have monthly academy that is ongoing live coaching calls every week, all the way up to one-on-one training. And so anything we can do to help you, please let us know. And so we are happy to answer any questions.
Yes, we do have a couple of questions for you. First of all, you suggested that a public school system is great if they get it right and that it's a better alternative to private school. Do you think that is true even in cases where, the child has severe delays, like they're nonverbal? Is it still better to be in a public?
So, and if I said that, I'm not saying it's better than public. I'm saying they have more options, right? So we live in a city of 7 million people, right? So I'm a past commissioner for the mayor's office for people with disabilities. And I can count on one hand the really good private schools that are for students with disabilities, right? And they're small, they're limited, they're quite the investment. And I don't know many people that can do that long term. Most of them stop at a certain age. There's very few that go K through 12. But the options, the training, the access to materials are going to be larger in most public schools, just because there's limitations in private schools. There's lots of great private schools, but the public school, whenever it's the right time for your child, it may never be the right time for your child, is going to give you opportunity to have more access to different products and outcomes, whether it is a higher level of assistive technology as it relates to a voice output communication devices, assistive technology and communication, assistive technology and written expression, music therapists, adaptive PE educators, and then of course, non-disabled peers, right? We want our kiddos to be with non-disabled peers to the maximum extent possible, because the greatest learning is from our peers. What kiddos learn from other kiddos is immeasurable, right? I can measure your reading level. I cannot measure what gains that you make around non-disabled peers. So, no, I think private school is fantastic if you have that ATM machine in your house and your butler drives your child there. But unfortunately, they all have limits, and so I wish everybody could choose anything they wanted, and they can't. The vast amount of options and availability, whether it's school clubs or classes you could take or UIL, those opportunities are far greater in public school than private schools.
So is there a way to evaluate and figure out which public schools have better quality, better reputation for kids?
You would ask a great advocate, not on a webinar. That's what you would do. So all schools are fantastic, but all schools sort of specialize in different things. If you had a child with a vision impairment, I would tell you what school district is better for that. No school district is going to be good at academics, special ed, dyslexia, autism. They're just not. So there's different school districts that end up greater in certain areas. And so you couldn't ask your realtor. A realtor couldn't tell you whether the school district is good or bad. And it's not about being good or bad. School districts are run by humans, and humans, like all of us, are flawed. So it's always a top-down issue, right? Who is your executive director of special education? I would look at how many maybe complaints or problems that they have had. You can pull that from TEA. But the thing that I would do is I would ask another parent, right? Tell a woman, tell the world, right? And so ask another parent, what has your experience been like in Elm Independent School District? What has it been like? And so, of course, their experience is not going to be the same as yours. And if you have a great school or school district, just know that teachers move, right? We are very fluid system. Great teachers end up becoming principals, which end up becoming an admin. So certainly I have an opinion about school districts as I work in them, but that's just my opinion. It may not be truth.
Right, exactly. I love that answer. Thank you so much. Do you have any practical steps for integrating a disabled child into society after high school? This parent wants their child to become 100% integrated into part of their surrounding world. What are your thoughts?
Sure. So I think that it's important that we access services immediately. So I sit on the board of Texas A&M University Center for Disabilities and Development, and obviously we have great programs there. We have the Bridge, we have the CAP. The first thing I would say is when your child is 12, you can access TWS or TWC. I don't ever know what we're calling it today, but Texas Workforce Solutions. You can access the ARC of Greater Houston. They all have resources. So your child can begin to have internships for jobs at 12. So the quicker that we access those services, the better. Again, nobody is going to knock on your door. Public schools are not going to give you all that information. That's why it's really important that you advocate or partner with somebody that does know those resources, so that you can get your child in them. I always tell people, don't send an email, don't call. You just show up like Shirley MacLaine in terms of endearment. Just knock on the door. That's what I did. I showed up with my son and I said, we're here to do an intake. And TWS did a week intake. So the quicker we can get our kids into what's going to happen post-secondary, the better.
Okay, yeah, definitely. And these are things also that Consolidated Planning Group can help with.
Yeah.
We have lists of resources and steps to take and what to do and what not to do that we can help you with as well. Okay, so if there was a mistake or incorrect outcomes on the evaluations, what do you do?
Right, so if there was a mistake, mistakes can be adjusted, right? If you said, you lived in Dallas and you really lived in, Corpus, that's a mistake. If you disagree with the outcome, then you can try to negotiate that at the table. I've negotiated outcomes at the table. What happens is an evaluator makes a recommendation based on criteria. So we could say this child meets eligibility for autism and an intellectual disability. And then I could negotiate that outcome that we leave the autism and that we wait for the intellectual disability until the child's 3. That way we have more robust evaluations. If you're not able to do that, and you're probably not going to be able to do that without good representation, is you could request an IEE, an Individualized Education Evaluation. That's at the expense of the district. They will provide you a list of providers that do those assessments, and that they will come in and do like assessments on your student and provide their evaluation back to the school, and you would reconvene as committee and see what those outcomes are.
Are there accommodations specific just to the gen ed classroom or just to the special ed classroom?
So an accommodation is what a child needs. It has nothing to do with location. Remember, special ed is it's a service, not a location. So if a kiddo needs the service, he needs the service. Often school districts, I won't tell you who they are, have started this little thing where you get support 3 days a week. I'm like, I think he has a disability every day, right? So you want to make sure that's, I think on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he still has a disability. And so I think that's important that that we make sure that we're delivering that complete product across settings. The accommodation that you may not need a certain accommodation in SPED because in a special ed setting, because they're going to do that, right? If your child's in general ed, they might need while they're in general ed to modify the work. If we decide it's more appropriate for her to do her reading and resource, then that setting, it already is modified. So I don't need to additionally put modified and resource. That's the product delivered in that setting. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does make sense. I put your slide with your contact information.
Yes.
I'm kind of trying to still go through the slides so that we can
You're
get the
fine.
questions answered, but also get the information out there. So please write down Karen's information here and
Yeah, absolutely.
advance to the next slide while she answers. My child's school is refusing implementation of a letterboard for communication. It's not an approved device. He has autism, and this is his only reliable mode of communication. Have you had success with this accommodation?
So it sounds like you're talking about a PEC system. So anything that we use for augmented communication, where I'm a huge proponent of VOCD, voice output communication device, or AAC, you can go to Special Education Academy YouTube channel. Dr. Deanna Olenek, I have several interviews with her. I have an interview with her and a man, it's called Lessons from My Big Toe. He has a master's degree and is profoundly physically disabled and communicates with one toe on a communication device. So anything that I can do to communicate, I want. There's 10 types of communicative intent. So we don't just say yes or no, red or blue. So our child has the legal right to have access to a full range of communication at the same time their peers do. And so depending on the specifics of your case, I'm happy to, you can shoot me an email at admin@specialeducationacademy.com. Any of these locations, you'll find me late at night. And so we want to give you the information because it's about your child being successful. Often in meetings, we get our feelings hurt. And I always say feelings have no place in a 504 meeting or a special ed meeting. You wouldn't have feelings when you're talking to your surgeon. It's a business meeting, and it's the business of educating your child with a disability. I don't care if somebody else has done it before. I don't care if we don't do it in this district. I don't care if you're a co-op. If we've identified that this will help Billy be successful, then we are excited to partner with you to get him that service and support.
Good. Here's her social media accounts. Grab those while you can. We're getting some good schools recommendations and not recommendations in the chat. So if you're interested in reading what other people think about different school districts, check out the chat box. Can an administrator or LEA delete or rewrite accommodations without further input from the special ed teacher or the team?
So they can't do it without the team. They can certainly do it without on a 504. Here's what you should know about a 504. It's not what I would want for my kiddos. There's no education in 504. So what you should know if your child's on a 504 is they can actually call your child down to the office, your 7-year-old, and delete stuff. So I'm not a fan of the 504. We're not legally allowed to make any adjustments to the IEP document without consensus. And that consensus, of course, includes the parent.
If your school has no knowledge of your child's condition, how do you inform them about it without overwhelming them?
That is a really good question. So I get kids all the time that have new medical conditions that are hard to pronounce, much less hard to explain. I have several kiddos over the year that have had dysautonomia. And I had never had a child before that. And sometimes we go in and we use all of this language and the school's just sort of looking at us like at a cow at a new crossing. You know, the point of an advocate, if you can get one, somebody to support you, my job is to take parent passion and to convert it into educator, right? And that's about kind of changing how you deliver it so that they can hear it, so that we can all speak the same thing. And sometimes medical conditions, I ask the client to sort of dial it down into a short 3-minute blurb that they can understand. I know that parents send, you know, teachers all of these links and take this and take that. And while that's great, teachers don't have the time to do that. We want to know what the thing is, what the medical condition is, and how does it impact the student at school? Does that condition impact them functionally, academically, emotionally, behaviorally? And that's how you convert that.
So I've got the contact information for Consolidated Planning Group up now. We have a Facebook page, and our YouTube channel is where we put all of these great helpful webinars. So you definitely want to check out our YouTube channel. How much changes from elementary school to middle school to high school in the IEP?
So it should be changing a lot, right? So federally at 16, we're supposed to be writing a transition plan that starts at 14 in Texas. So transition starts the day before you have the baby, right? And transition is, some of us spend so much time working with the IEP team in elementary school, we kind of sit back in junior high and high school, and it's just the opposite, right? Because they're going to live to be 88 years old, or however old. You need to make sure that the IEP is robust. What changes is your child, right? The child changes. So if we're giving a good IEP product, we should be making gains and looking at what a kiddo needs. And so that can change from semester to semester. When there's a new need or there's no longer a need, right? We've delivered the support and behavior. He doesn't need a behavior intervention plan. Great, let's debip him, right? So kids are the factor that's changing, the children.
Yes, yes. And we all change and grow, and nobody changes and grows more than kids. So
Right.
If the school did not approve an AAC device and your child is nonverbal, can they use their own device? Can they accommodate use of their own device?
So if your child's nonverbal and you didn't get an AAC device, you should call me immediately. So an AAC device is an augmented communication device. That is a way that it's your right under the Department of Justice to have the ability to communicate at the same time the other little cherubs did. So I have all of my kiddos that meet eligibility for an AAC device get one, whether it costs the school district $16,000 or not my problem. So they have the right to communicate at the same time. So you would have an assessment that's done robustly, make sure that communication devices that we trialed over 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 weeks were feature matched and then delivered. And then when they were delivered, did the teachers use them? It was sitting on his desk. He didn't use it. No kidding. We had access to it. Well, I have access to a gym. I don't go in one, right? So language is about immersion. Did you immerse that child in that language? Because it's language. So I certainly ask for an IEE and kind of, I would need more information around that, but a student absolutely has the right to have an augmented communication device.
What about summer program options? Can you recommend some good summer programs?
So if you're talking about summer programs as it relates to school, so schools have ESY, extended school year, and there's 2 criteria. They usually just mention one. The first criteria is the student has documented regression on IEP goals with a profound amount of time to recoup them. So often it would be rare that you would have a school that said that occurred. However, that second criteria is concern for loss of critical skills, right? I've gained these critical skills. I don't want to use that 10-week, 11-week block that they go away, right? As it relates to private summer programs, I don't know. I mean, I know a few that my parents go to, but that would be certainly something that maybe Kat could get to you or Michelle. I like to spend all my summer at Talbot's, probably not where your child wants to be, but anything you can do to make sure that we don't have a complete gap in their summer, it's going to be great.
This parent is saying that they just noticed that their child's plaque is like a copy and paste from their previous year.
Yeah.
And what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are that's unacceptable. So one of the things that we do is we do records review. So we represent families without actually going to them. Not that I don't love going to a meeting. And then we go through your records and we prep you and we say, this is what we add to your plaque. Adjust these goals, change this criteria, change this language here, ask for, you need more support here. And we give you the language to go in with, but definitely sit down with at least another parent. Maybe I'm sure Kat has people, or, there's lots of people that can help you. When you read it out loud, does it tell me who that child is in that setting and how their disability impacts them? And rarely does it. And if I don't know that, then I'm just the next teacher guessing, being nice to Billy. I don't need you to be nice to Billy. I need you to educate him to work on mitigating his gaps by the impact of his disability.
Okay, this one's a little long, so stay with me. My 2-year-old son is in the evaluation phase before being accepted into the PPCD program. He will be 3 by the end of the process. We're concerned about him being delayed in speech and mobility. He needs to learn social skills and how to self-feed. I anticipate we will soon meet to create and agree upon an IEP and goals. What should we take into consideration as we go through this process, and what should we ask for?
So that's a good question. So here's the first question. Do you know the process? If you don't know the process, take somebody with you, even if it's Aunt Myrtle, take somebody with you that can help you through it. What we should anticipate is first we need to identify the eligibilities. So just about what you said, there's going to be a language impairment, there's going to be orthopedic impairment. So there are, and we have them, we have a 6-week module, 6 modules on the YouTube channel, Special Education Academy, that talk about the federal eligibilities. Often I have kiddos that have FMOs and they don't have an orthopedic impairment. If you don't have the right eligibilities, then the rest of the product is wrong. Again, you want to make sure that his plaque is robust, that we've indicated everything, medical need, educational need, therapeutic need, because if we don't have that information in totality, then we can't program right. And then based on those deficits, we're going to write goals in those areas we talked about: functional, social, communicative, academic, and behavioral, right? And then we're going to talk about what is the level of support additional that he needs across settings other than a general ed teacher.
Fantastic. Goodness, I'm trying to get through as many questions as
Yes.
possible. A token board, can a token board be used on an accommodation?
Sure, a token board is an accommodation, and we want to make sure that it's used for reinforcement, right? And that is, we don't get reinforced every 4 minutes. That's not a token board, right? Did you earn something? And it's to give a child something to focus on, give them a why. Why am I sitting here doing writer's workshop? You want to make sure it's appropriate. We don't want to make sure that we're not giving them an M&M every 4 minutes. But if that mitigates the impact, then certainly we use that.
Reevaluations. The last one was April 2019. He's due for another one. Do they need to do it before April of this year?
So you can have reevaluations as often as every year. So we do reevaluations if there's a need. If all of a sudden my child has an eating issue and is starting to put pockets of food in his mouth, then I'm going to ask for a dysphagia evaluation. I do not have to wait till April of whatever. We do the evaluation when there's a need. When a child's already in special education and the parents ask for the evaluation, it is illegal to tell them no if you have not provided it already, or if it's been more than a year. So this is what I say: if the school denies me the evaluation, I'm going to say, great, please provide me that denial and a prior written notice. Anything the school denies you, say, please provide me that denial and a prior written notice by close of business. That little phrase right there would change outcomes.
So at the reevaluation, they only did informal assessments, not formal testing.
Then they didn't do a reevaluation. Informal is I'm at Sonic. Hey, how's it going, Michelle? Billy doing good? Yeah, boom. Informal didn't give me any information. The reason we did formal to begin with is so that we can see if there's improvement. The formal at the beginning was to look at baselines. Are we improving? Is the program that I'm delivering impacting the acuity of his disability? Informal, respectfully, is a waste of time.
Okay, I'm reading lots of thank yous. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. And they're all, and Michelle, Michelle or Kat, people are welcome to email me. I'm happy to answer the questions. What I care about is that you get the information and that you go and tell 100 other parents so that we all win. Parents win, schools win, the kids win. That's what matters.
Yes, I want to thank everybody, especially Shmel. I'm not sure I'm going to say this right, but Shmel Urashalmi for asking some great questions today. Thank you so much. And everybody who's been here today, we will email out this
Slides.
the slides, and we have recorded this webinar for you today. Here's the contact information for Consolidated Planning Group. We always offer a free personalized consultation. You can get to our calendar system by using this QR code. I know we're over a little bit, but Karen, if you would like to please mention your email again.
So my email is admin@specialeducationacademy.com, admin@specialeducationacademy.com, and you can find us on all platforms. I don't even know what they are, but we're out there platforming. So we want to resource you. Please avail yourself of the YouTube channel. Anybody can watch it, even teachers at school. Just kidding, on your off period. But we want you to have the information. If there's ever something that you want us to make a video or training to put on the YouTube channel, we're happy to do that.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Karen, everybody, Shmael, for your great questions, and Kat for having us. If there is anything else you need, please feel free to reach out to any of us. We can help you. Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank y'all. Thank you, Kat.